Hi, I'm Bonnie Browning with the American Quilter Society, and I am here at AQS Quilt Week in Albuquerque with Gail Garber. Gail, thank you so much for loaning us your quilts for a special exhibit here.
I am so happy that you allowed me to do this. It was really an honor to be here and to show my quilts. I think it's the very first time ever that this many of my quilts have been shown in one place.
Okay, well, so she's going to take us on a little walking tour, and you'll get to see some of the last 30 years of quilts made by Gail Garber.
So this is Kay Pike. She is my very first quilt teacher. She taught that class in 1980, and it was so funny because every stitch, this is back when every stitch had to be by hand or it wasn't really a quilt. And she taught me how to draft, and so if it hadn't been for her, I don't know if this ever would have happened. So this quilt I used to drag it around. I used it as a throw, and it was well used, and then one day I realized that I probably ought to not use it anymore because it might become important, because by then I had quite a large collection. And so I put it away and I didn't use it anymore. But you can see it's just really a well-worn quilt. And then this is my second quilt. One of the things about the first quilt is making it by hand was so incredibly slow that my second quilt was done all by machine. So this was done within a couple of years of that one. And in this one, I still didn't know what I was doing, so I have pressed all my seams open. And so when I went to quilt it, there was no ditch to quilt in. So like right off the bat, I hired out the quilting to somebody else. And you'll see that my early quilts, I quilted them myself, but the later quilts, a lot of them are quilted by other people. And just like I said in my talk today, there were, I like groups and I like doing group projects. And this is Emily, so she is probably the last big Southwestern applique quilt that I did. I finished her in 1990, and it was done from an image of a Navajo girl seated in front of Shiprock, New Mexico. And this one was all hand appliqued by me, and it was hand quilted by me. So, and the thing that I find fascinating is when you look at a quilt like this with the amount of quilting in it today versus the amount of quilting, the amount of quilting we had then versus what we have today, this would just simply never hold up because it would have to be stitched within an inch of its life. So that was one part. And then this quilt has a great story. This is Save Our Eagles. And in Albuquerque, I had a group of friends that I used to quilt with, and we liked hiking, so we hiked in the mountains of the Sandias. And one day we decided to do a fundraising raffle quilt that reflected our interest in the outdoors. And we called a local group and we volunteered to make a raffle quilt. So it was a bird group, and we made this little quilt and we raffled it off. It took about a year. And during that time, I met and fell in love with a red-tailed hawk. She was an educational bird, and it had never occurred to me before that I could be that close to a red-tailed hawk. So I just wanted to work with her. I didn't really want to save the world. And that led me to start Hawks Aloft. It's a local conservation organization. We work with birds of prey, and we do research and education, and we use non-releasable birds in the classroom. So this quilt was finished in 1989, and it went away. But then 3 years ago, a friend of mine was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so we made her a friendship quilt, and she passed away a year ago. And what happened is one of the ladies who had contributed a quilt block said to one of the guys that helped organize it that she had won this quilt a long time ago, and it had 2 eagles and a baby, and would Hawks Aloft be interested in having that quilt back? And so the quilt came back to me 20 years later. So this one hangs in my guest room now. So I just love this quilt. This is a round robin quilt. This was done between the United States and New Zealand. And they had decided it would be a good thing to do to have this pass back and forth across the Pacific Ocean. And so I made my center. I went down to the local quilt shop and I bought all of the chili fabric. See there? It's all on the back. So I bought 4 different kinds of chili fabric and some cow skulls for good measure, and I made this middle, and I thought, oh my gosh, that might be the ugliest quilt in the history of the world. But when it came back 2 years later, I just love this quilt. It's like one of my absolute favorite quilts. It's so cheery, and it's so yellow and orange, and it's just like not something you would think of when you set out to make a quilt. So this is called Red or Green. This is just a collage of all things that I love about Albuquerque. It's a quilt from 1990, and it's hand appliqued by me, but it was hand quilted by Margaret Prina. For me, when I make a quilt, what I love is I love the design part of it, and I love the color, and I love putting the top together. And as soon as the top is together, I don't want to have to do it anymore. I'm kind of done, and so. I've been getting other people to do the quilting, and I think that's a different layer of art that they add to that. They add their own touch. So this usually hangs over my desk where I do my work, and this is my swan song for the New Mexico Quilters Association, and we were doing block of the month, and it was my year to design them all. So this year I designed houses from all over the U.S. and the funny thing is that, usually you make a block and you put it in the monthly magazine, and everybody makes a block and they bring them in, and then somebody wins them all. This year, nobody made any of the blocks except me. And so I got the quilt, and it was hand quilted by Peggy Chauvet. And I love this one. It's just I love red, white, and blue, and I love I just love the fact that it's everybody's home. This is called Starry, Starry Night. This is a quilt that has been used, so it's been used on beds. And you can see that the colors are not as intense as they used to be. But it was designed from a block of the month class that I used to teach here at the Bernina Sewing Center. And it was one of my first large quilts that I had machine quilted. So it was, you can just really see the difference between a used quilt and a not used quilt. This is a quilt that I started a long time ago in the 1980s. I made this for my brother's wedding, for his wedding gift. But it's got pieces of my daughter's dresses, and it's got strips from special fabrics that I worked on for projects, and especially for group projects. And by the time I got it done, I knew that he wouldn't love it nearly as much as I would love it, and so he's never seen this quilt. And so I finally got it quilted. It was quilted by my friend Michelle a few years ago, and finally finished, and I just love this quilt. This is a quilt, although this was made in the 1980s, and this one was made in the 1990s. This one has never been used, and this one has been, so you can see how much the colors fade. And one other thing you might want to think about when you fold up your quilts, and as you look at the show, you sometimes see this nice fold line down the middle, because everybody folds their quilt this way and then this way. I fold my quilts diagonally, because then no one is ever going to be able to fold it the same way again, including you. And it really helps to reduce those permanent crease lines that some of the quilts get. This is a quilt that I did for the Alzheimer's Art Quilt Initiative. My mom had severe dementia. I don't know if it was Alzheimer's or if it was just vascular dementia. But, when Ami Sim started the Alzheimer's Art Quilt Initiative, I got involved right away. And the first thing that we as a group did is we made this quilt display that traveled around the country to promote Alzheimer's awareness. And so this was done from a photo of my mom on her wedding day. When life is bright and shiny and you think it will be perfect forever, and then after the 6 children came along, there were some bumps in the road, so it's still good, but not quite as good. And this represents the years after my father died, when my mother is locked in her dark and stormy, demented world. And the red slashes represent my joy at being able to be near her in her final years. And this is done in the order of our birth, so it goes girl, boy, boy, girl, girl, boy. And through it all, she's surrounded in love by her 6 children. And this one unquilted section represents the black void where her mind was. And so there are no corners on this quilt. This is a really cathartic quilt to make. My mom passed away 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. And it's just as a horrible, horrible disease. And Ami Sims, who started the Alzheimer's Art Quilt Initiative, her goal was to raise $1 million for research on Alzheimer's, and she reached that goal a year ago. And this is Eagle Kachina. This is another old one. It was from 1989. And you know, the thing you can notice about this is you notice that there's just not very much quilting in it. And that was actually the style of the 1980s. You know, you didn't put a lot of quilting into anything. It was my first quilt that was entered at Paducah. And when I got my judge's critique back, all it said was too much negative space. It didn't say a single nice thing. And I looked at this and I didn't understand. I had no idea why it had too much negative space. I get it now, but I didn't get it then. And so what happened is I have that really elaborate figure, I have a really elaborate border, and that background, you know, I just kind of threw it together so there would be something for that figure to be on. And so, you know, they don't hold together. So it needed some complexity in that background. And that's what they meant. So this is my Epiphany quilt right here. This is Big Bang. And you know what? I got it. I figured out the negative space thing. So in this quilt, you'll notice that there's a foreground and a background and there are borders, and really there's something going on in every single one, every single space. There's no negative space in here. And so I finally figured out, you know, 8 years later what the judges meant in that particular quilt. And here I consider this my Epiphany quilt because this is the one that changed my perception of design. So it has, you know, I wanted it to have two stars that were colliding, and I knew how to do that, but what I didn't know how to do was the background. So I had drawn those arcs over there, and I was going to put a different fabric in every arc, and I realized that that wasn't going to look like motion, it was going to look like a rainbow. So what I did is I just took all my blue fabrics and I sorted them into lights, mediums, and darks, and I just started randomly sewing pieces together, and the only thing that worked was flying geese. And so this is probably the most complex quilt possibly that I've ever made, because I use transparency. I have things that come in front of the borders and disappear behind the borders. And I just love this quilt because obviously this was a turning point for me in my quilt design. This is my happy place, because this one is, I just wanted to see what it was going to look like if I made 3 rows of geese go through that donut in the middle. And then everything else just kind of grew out of that spot. And so I just love the quilt. I mean, I was just goofing off one day playing with paper, and this is what came out. This one is called Galactic Tango. So by then I was dancing with a folk dancing group. And so you'll start to see dance names in the titles of some of my quilts from here on in as we go around to the other side. So that was a new thing in my life, and so it just kind of changed that as I was thinking about ways I could name quilts. And this one is a new quilt. This is from 2013. This is Rainbow Crow, and it tells the story of the most beautiful, colorful bird in the world with the most beautiful singing voice that actually flew to the gods in the sky and was able to return the light to the world because the animals were afraid. And the story goes, it's based on a myth, that when Rainbow Crow returned the torch to the world to light the planet, he was very sad because his feathers had been singed in the flight, and he'd breathed in the smoke, and he had just a croak for a voice. So he was very sad. But the moral of the story is that if you look at the feather of a black bird, of any black bird in the right light, you can see all the colors of the rainbow. And that's true. And then all the fetishes here represent all the animals of the world that he saved. And this was quilted by Chris Vieira, and she and I do a lot of work together these days. So she does a lot of my quilting. So these two complementary colors in quadrille are It's a color study, so I was looking at using the same exact design, and I was doing warm colors versus cool colors. And of course, quadrille was a dance from a long time ago, and complementary colors is just the warms and the cools there. And so the other thing about these is these were kind of when I was investigating 4-block repeat patterns. So every block in here is exactly the same for both, and yet you get these very different designs. Here we have fillers. This was made strictly as a teaching sample for a class, and it shows all of the 14 different designs that fit within these filler shapes that are in my new book, Flying Colors. So, and Donna and I collaborated on this one, and I had this awesome piece of green fabric that was gradated, and I didn't want to lose that, so what we did is we cut these 3 pieces, and then I laid the pieces over the top so that I didn't have to worry about how to keep the color gradations different. And this is another 4-block repeat pattern. Here it is. This one is a study in asymmetry. It's in the collection of Linda Petrie and Steve Sacco. And so my star is asymmetrical. Everything about the block is asymmetrical except that little corner right there, which allows me to do my mirror images. And the name of this one is called Rueda de la Fortuna, which means Wheel of Fortune. It's also one of the dances that my folk dance group does. And it's a circle dance where we go out and we come in, and it's a Cuban dance form. And so Steve and Linda were my dance teachers for this. And the whole time I made it, it was like, this really belongs to them. This really doesn't belong to me. And it's the first time really that I've had a quilt where it's like, this isn't my quilt, it's somebody else's quilt. So it lives with them now. This is Dawn of the New Day. This was done for the American Quilters Society United We Quilt exhibit back in 2002. It was done so 9/11 happened in September. This quilt was done in March of the following year, so within 6 months. It traveled with the AQS show for probably 3 years, and then it came back to live with me. And I knew I didn't want a graphic reminder of that horrible day. So I chose to represent it in an abstract way, and this represents the rubble that was the World Trade Center. And those little yellow slivers of light, the pointy dudes, represent the individual good deeds that happened that day. And it all culminates in a bright shining star of freedom surrounded by the patriotism of America. And this has the border, you'll notice, is made of tons of different red fabrics. It's every red fabric that I own, and this is my 10,000 Pyramids border that, I love this because if you think about it, if I just did this with one red fabric, it wouldn't be nearly as effective. But because I use every red fabric, you've got sparkle and lights and darks, and there's stuff going on here. And this is a really easy border to do, so I encourage that. It only has one corner. You know how when you make a binding and you put how 3 corners work and one never does? If you only have one corner, you improve your odds immensely. This is my very first round robin, which was made with my local quilting group. And so I made this block right here, and I sent this off, and I didn't see it again for 2 years. And when it came back, though, I started it in like 1995, and when it came back, it was finished just out to there, so just to the edge of the white. And it just never looked done, and so I didn't do anything with it until I figured out this outside border, which I completed myself, and then I was able to finally finish the quilt. And it was quilted by Donna Barnett, so it was really fun. This one really is, it was based on this fabric that I bought, which is an Australian fabric, and then this is an African fabric. And I had made a quilt for the Pilgrim Roy Challenge, which was a fundraiser for the National Quilt Museum. And I hated the fabrics I had to use there, so I determined I would make it again in fabrics of my own choosing. And so I love this quilt because it just has a lot going on in there, and you can sit and look at it for hours and hours and see new things in there. Does anybody wonder what a kimberlite is? So kimberlites, you know, diamonds are formed in the center of the earth at high pressure, extremely high pressure. And diamonds are found in mines and in underground places. So what happens is these diamonds are formed in what's called a kimberlite pipe. And so diamonds can actually be ejected from the earth through these kimberlite pipes. And in some of the diamond mines, when they were first discovered, they were discovered because there were diamonds laying on the surface of the earth. And so here you see the diamond, and there's the kimberlite pipe. Now you might wonder, like, how in the world that word ever came to my attention, yeah? But I was teaching up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and that was only 200 miles south of the De Beers diamond mines. And so everything up there is called kimberlites. Kimberlites daycare, kimberlites this. And I asked the question, well, what's a kimberlite and why is everything named that? And so that's the story of this quilt. These 3 quilts were all made from my book, Flying Colors. And, you know, I've learned that I need to make things small so people can actually make them. This is actually a pattern in the book. And it was inspired by a trip to Alaska where, you know, they have those black spruce, which are like 40 feet tall and about this big around. And when the wind blows, which it blows a lot in Alaska, the trees go and they just tip to one side. And so that was what inspired tiny trees. And so if you look at this one, this is on the cover of my book, Flying Colors. And it has that same 10,000 pyramids border all done in purples. And you can see you just get this really rich texture about it. And Monarchs in Winter, which is right here, is that was going to be a pattern in the book, but it was so really incredibly hard to make that I didn't make it a pattern in the book, figuring you all would appreciate not having to deal with that. And I was glad it was over. This is Abo Canyon Memories. It was done for the Hawks Aloft raffle quilt from 2011, and it's one of my favorite Hawks Aloft raffle quilts of all time. And it was inspired by Donna and Michelle and I working together on the colors. And Donna is fascinated by thunderbirds. So that was when the thunderbirds first started appearing in my quilts. And I liked it so well, because I knew I couldn't get the raffle quilt, that I made it over again. So this was a collaboration between me and Donna Barnitz and Michelle Heimel. And I love this quilt a lot. I have a great passion also for Navajo rugs. And so I don't know if you all saw the Navajo weaver over there. Her work is incredible. And this is our 2014 raffle quilt. It was inspired by a photograph of a real bird. And we did get it done in one day. We had cut out the birds in advance, so that part was done, but everything else was done by a group of 12 people. And we finished up at 6 o'clock at night. This was won by a woman named Susie Chavez, who is a 6th grade teacher down in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. And she was nice enough to let us keep it for the show. And so on Monday, I need to send her her quilt. Here, this one is called Mariposa Mi Amigas. And it is was done by Donna Barnitz, Afton Warwick, myself, and Chris Vieira. And it was inspired by Donna, who said, I think you should do something with butterflies. And we could make appliques of them and do this, you know, we could do that filigree work in there. And so that was how it all got started. And then we all worked on it. And so Chris Vieira is kind of new to our partnership. She's the quilter part of it. And her quilting is amazing. And so I want to show you the back of this quilt, because the quilting in this is just to die for. And so, you know, I love our partnership, and because there's no way I could ever do this myself. And so by working as a team, we can do amazing work. And so this quilt, when it leaves here, it's going to go off to the Lancaster Quilt Show, where it will be in competition. So this one is called Climate Change. And so when I make quilts, I don't always have the whole design drawn out. You know, so on this one, the reason the quilt is this size is because that's how big the piece of paper was that I had. So I knew I wanted to do the circle thing right here. And so I made that part. And then I thought, well, now what am I going to do? So I drew all these flames in the warm side. I thought, oh, I like that. And I knew I wanted to do warm and cool. And but I was piecing all the parts I liked. So I made this and I made all of these. And this over here was a white piece of paper. I didn't have anything drawn there. I had no vision for it. And then as I started getting closer to that, I thought, I'm gonna have to do something with that side of the quilt. And so I started filling it in, and I used, instead of using curvy, warm colors, I used very linear shapes in icy colors. And I got it all together, and I looked at it, and it was like, well, there was that quilt, and then there's that quilt, you know, the cool side and the warm side, but there was nothing there to connect them. And so I took the quilt apart, and I put in cool colors here and here. And then I added this, because this was the edge of the quilt, but I added this in, so then it would you'd have the cool floating behind the warm. And it was quilted by Chris Vieira. So here we have my two quilts that hang in the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky. And the one on the left, its name is Azimuth, and it was made from 1984 to 1989. And it's 100% hand stitched and hand quilted. And the reason I think it took 5 years is because a lot of the time it was wadded up in the closet because I was mad at it because it was taking forever. Today I would probably never make that quilt by hand. It was made to fit on my king size bed, and things drop exactly at the edge of the mattress. And it's never been on my bed, it's never been used. And it was done with, because I have dogs that live at my house. So dogs get on my bed, and it's like I couldn't put a hand quilted quilt on my bed, so it never got on the bed then. And then I got divorced, and then I bought a different size of bed. So now it really didn't fit, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I got worried about what was going to happen to this quilt, because at this point I knew it was a valuable quilt. And so it went to live at the National Quilt Museum, where it will be well cared for the rest of its life, better than I would ever dream of caring for it. And then over here, because they wanted an example of an early quilt and a new quilt, a contemporary quilt, then I sent Cosmic Parade, which is on the cover of my book Stellar Journeys, published by the American Quilters Society. And in this quilt, you can see this one followed Big Bang, which I showed you earlier. You'll see that in there, I've got that strong diagonal splash of stars. These are like the floats in the parade, and those flying goose strips actually represent like the clowns and stuff that run around among the floats. And in the background of this one, I have, I've pieced that background. So I've used that same texture thing that I use on 10,000 Pyramids. And to create my background. So it still says it's a background, but there's stuff going on there. So it makes it more complex. And again, there is no negative space. And then across the top and down one side is the pointy dude border, which that was where I figured out how to do that. And then I rounded one corner. So this really was a departure from Big Bang and a step in the progress of my level of design. So the weirdest thing about having your quilts hang in the National Quilt Museum is when you go to visit your quilts hanging there and you realize that you can never again touch your own quilt. Not ever, like not even here. Like I showed you some and I touched them, I would not touch these quilts.
Thanks for the tour, Gail. And you know what? It was I know that everybody who came here loved seeing this exhibit.
Thank you so much for letting me do this. And I just want to say that I am so thrilled that the American Quilters Society has come to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I hope that you come back year after year after year, and this show just grows and grows. So I'm really proud to be part of the very first Albuquerque Quilt Week ever.